Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is Lee Pfeffer, and I am the Manager of Museum Experience at the LGBT Historical Society, and I thank you for joining us this evening or at whatever time it is from wherever you are tuning in from. Before we get started with the program tonight, I want to start by acknowledging that the GLBT Historical Society is based on Ohlone tribal land. I invite any Indigenous folks with us today to make themselves visible and known in the chat and be recognized as we honor the contemporary and ancestral lives of America's Indigenous peoples. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel and our website. So if you're watching afterwards, you can check this out. If you are watching with us live, we welcome your active participation in the chat, and we encourage you to post comments, observations, and questions for the participants. We're going to be having a Q&A segment near the end of the evening. Before I turn it over to our moderator and host for tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Society and the work that we do, in case you're not familiar with us. So the GLBT Historical Society stands for Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Historical Society. We were founded in 1985 and are recognized internationally as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. Our mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. Our operations are based around two sites. We have the GLBT Historical Society Museum, located in the heart of San Francisco's Castro neighborhood, and we opened up in 2011, and we actually just reopened earlier this month after a year of being closed from the pandemic. And we also have the Dr. John P. DeCecco Archives and Research Center in the Mid-Market District. I encourage you, please, to check out our museum, as well as our growing array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources online on our website at glbthistory.org. Finally, I would really love to thank all of our members and donors who make our work possible. If you're not already a card-carrying member of the GLBT Historical Society, I invite you to consider joining today. Members get a variety of really wonderful perks, including a 20% discount on purchases of cool swag from our online store, and we just released a really fantastic new Pride campaign line. There's some really, really beautiful pieces on there. And you also get access to special members-only events, and now that the museum is open once more, you get free admission for yourself and a guest any day that we are open. You can learn more about how to become a member and other ways to support the Society by visiting glbthistory.org/join-give. And I want to thank you again for being here tonight. And before I introduce our moderator for the program, we have a wonderful trailer for the Doodler podcast that'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about tonight and what you can expect from the series once you check it out. And when we are done with that, I will bring up our host. So enjoy.
Think of San Francisco as a gay haven, but it was also home to the Doodler. It might sound like a goofy name, but this killer's body count is as high as the Zodiac. And you've probably never heard of him, because all of his victims were gay men. I'm Kevin Fagan. I've been reporting at the San Francisco Chronicle for 28 years. I've covered the Zodiac, the Unabomber, and mass murderers from coast to coast, but I'd never heard of the Doodler. That makes me mad. The center of gay liberation in the 70s?
The bars were just overflowing and dancing. It was just such a fun time.
Was also extremely dangerous.
And then you bring in this very scary element of these stabbings.
And he wasn't just stabbed. He was brutally beaten.
We're hoping we can breathe new life into this cold case. Our leads have brought us closer to solving these crimes than ever before. This is the untold story of the Doodler. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcasts. Coming in March 2021.
So as you saw in the trailer, our host for this evening and the host of the podcast is Kevin Fagan, and I'm going to introduce him for us tonight, and then he will take it on from me. Kevin is a Pulitzer Prize nominated longtime reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. He's an expert on murderers from the Zodiac Killer to the Unabomber, and his 8-part podcast and story package on the unsolved Doodler serial killer case is the Chronicle's first true crime podcast series. He's witnessed 7 executions and covered some of the biggest stories of our time, from the September 11th terrorist attacks and the 1999 Columbine High School massacre to several decades worth of crimes, presidential elections, wildfires, floods, protests, and riots. He's also one of the country's foremost journalists on homelessness, having spent 6 months sleeping in the streets of San Francisco for the influential Shame of the City series in 2003, and reporting since then on aspects of the problem all over the nation. Fagan's national awards include the James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism and Excellence in Urban Journalism Award, as well as the prestigious John Knight Fellowship at Stanford University. So, welcome, Kevin.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I am so happy, and thank you, Lee, and the GLBT Historical Society for hosting this. You guys do a very important thing, and I'm just thrilled to be part of this. I'm also thrilled to have these 3 panelists that we have. As you heard from that trailer, the Doodler serial killings was not well known. It happened in 1974-75, and there was a killer who would go into gay bars and pick a person, draw a sketch of them, and then go up and say, "Hey, like my sketch?" And if you like the sketch, off they'd go to a private place, and they'd wind up getting stabbed to death. And this happened at least 5 times, and my partner Mike Taylor on the project and I found a 6th victim as well, and there may be more. The thing that happened was it was not well covered in the mainstream. Well, it was barely covered at all in the mainstream media because at the time it was oppressive for gay people, for gays and lesbians. Certainly transgender people, there were still sodomy laws on the books, cross-dressing laws. You can get arrested for walking down the street holding hands with someone of the same sex. So these things were fairly ignored, and that made it easier for the Doodler to work his horror. Tonight, what I have with me is 3 of the 3 wonderful people from the series that I did. I spent 3 years working on this podcast and story series, and intensively for the past year, pretty much nothing but with my partner Mike Taylor, who's a private investigator. He used to work at the Chronicle, and along the way we tried to find people who knew the history, who were there, who were involved, who had a piece of this saga of what the Doodler had done, and I will tell you who they are. Tonight we have Tom Ammiano, and I've written out a little bit on who he is because these 3 people are amazing. Tom is a longtime LGBTQ activist, and he was elected to the California State Assembly, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Education. As an openly gay school teacher in the city in the 1970s and during the Doodler years, he co-founded the successful No on 6 campaign against the Briggs Initiative, which would have barred LGBTQ people from teaching in California. Now, some of the younger folks will not remember that, but that was a very big deal then. Tom is also a terrific comedian, and he has a new autobiography called, appropriately for Tom, Kiss My Gay Ass. He tells it as he sees it, as you will hear in this panel. Melissa Stevens Honrath is the sister of Jay Stevens, who she grew up knowing as Joe, and he was murdered by the Doodler serial killer in June 1974. She's a nurse. She lives here in the Bay Area. And in the 1970s, Melissa sang, danced, and did comedy with her brother and comic Steve Miller on stage in San Francisco. They called themselves the Wonder Sisters. And the old reviews I dug up of the act, it was hilarious. And you talk to Melissa, these guys were true performers. And Jay, if he was alive today, I'm sure he would have become a big star. She's also a lovely soul with a very clear-eyed view of the world, and it's been a privilege to get to know her. The third panelist that we have is Ann Cronenberg. She is also a longtime LGBTQ activist and was campaign manager for Harvey Milk's historic run that got him elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1977. She served as his aide then when he was in office. She co-founded the Harvey Milk Foundation and served as deputy director of the San Francisco Department of Public Health, as well as executive director of the City Department of Emergency Management. She doesn't sit around much. She stays very busy. And like Tom, she is a living encyclopedia of LGBTQ history and perspective, and she never backs down from anything tough. All three of these folks I found to be absolutely delightful to include in this podcast. And Lee, if you bring them on, let's have a little conversation with some of these folks. It's good to see you all. I was going to ask first, how did you like being in this podcast? Tell us a little bit about why I had you in the podcast, and then how you felt about being in it. Tom, why don't you go first? Your face is the biggest on the screen right now.
Big face. I was so happy to, hear from you about this, because it is something. There's so many memories in so many years, and that it was kind of buried. I think it's not even in our collective consciousness. We of course we know about George Moscone, and we know about Harvey Milk, and there's even been movies about the Zodiac Killer, etc. I think this one got lost in the melee of history. So much happened here in San Francisco. So I think you did a real service. It's good for us to be reminded, this is Gay Pride Month, and there's a lot of celebrating. That's part of it. But the reason we're celebrating certain triumphs is because of a very dark and dangerous history. I think we need to keep connecting those dots. And I think Anne would agree, too, that one of Milk's gifts was being able to connect those dots. They call it intersectionality today. But he actually lived that in practice and in his politics. So I'm grateful.
Yeah. And Anne, why don't you talk a little bit?
So I was surprised when you called me for this, because I did not know any of the victims, the Doodler victims, and I was not quite sure what you were attempting to do, Kevin. But I was so thrilled once we started talking to realize you were setting the context for how this could have taken place in that period of time, and where the lesbian and gay community was at that time, and also the fact that the straight community and the police force in San Francisco and during that time was not going to spend the time and the money and the effort to investigate gay murders. If the Doodler was assassinating people in Pacific Heights and they were straight white men, I think it would have gotten a lot of publicity. But because of who the victims were, and so sadly it got lost. And so many people who've watched the podcast and talked to me afterwards have said, we never heard about the Doodler before. Right. And so you are doing a real service for us, Kevin, in bringing this forward.
Well, thank you. That was a main purpose in this. I did not want to just do a crime story, because the history I thought was phenomenally important. Such oppressive times and such bravery. I mean, both of you, Anne and Tom, you were doing your thing at a time when you could have been jailed for just being who you were. I thought it was very important to do that. And this podcast got an international audience. It was listened pretty well across this country, and in Europe, Britain, and Australia. And the thing that, in addition to the context, I really wanted to bring to life the people whose lives were lost and what effect that had, because so often they get forgotten. And the mainstream media did not cover this well at all. Did hardly cover it at all, period, back then, including the Chronicle and the Examiner and all the other outlets. And one of the most remarkable, all five of the victims that we found, and then the sixth, Warren Andrews, they were remarkable people. I wanted to read their names. There was Gerald Kavanaugh, Joseph J. Stevens, Klaus Chrisman, Fred Kappen, and Harold Goldberg, and then Warren Andrews. And each one was just trying to be themselves at a time when society was fighting so hard not to let them be that. And one of the great privileges I had in this podcast was meeting Melissa, who is our next panelist. Melissa, I thought your memories of your brother, who died in June 1974. Your memories were just, they made me cry. It was it was very moving, and what you had with him and the experiences you had with him, I thought were very important to bring out. So tell me, what did you think when you were included in this thing, and what kind of reaction have you had to being in this podcast?
Well, again, having nothing done at the time of the murder left a big hole in my heart, and this is kind of helping me heal. So that part is very helpful, and being part of the podcast, I feel like I've added some points to it that maybe if I decided not to talk to you would have been missed. And but just growing up with Jay was just a delightful thing. He was so loved by our family, and he was just so naturally a woman, really. And so yeah.
He would be trans if he was alive today, wouldn't he?
Yes, he certainly would. And he looked it too. He was beautiful, just beautiful. And again, like we've talked about, he was just very tall. So, that kind of made it hard. And he had very large feet, made it very hard to get some pumps. So anyhow, yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about it, just for everyone here. Tell us a little bit about the show, the Wonder Sisters.
Well, the Wonder Sisters actually was an act in a show called Stevens Miller and Friends, and we played a lot of clubs. And one of the clubs in San Francisco was a club called the Cabaret, which was in North Beach.
I know it.
Yeah, and fun place. They had the theater down. They had a restaurant. They had a restaurant, a really nice bar, and a nice theater downstairs. And upstairs was a dance hall. And it was a very popular place. And my brother ended up asking me to be part of this group. It was my brother, Jay Stevens, Steve Miller, and another man, Michael Daly. And they asked me to be a part of it because we needed to do some timings, because we were timing things. We were doing blackout sketches. And so there had to be some costume changes in between there and stuff. So they got me actually to come and sing, which probably wasn't the best idea, but that's how it got me in there. But then it ended up that the four of us together had a really good timing sense as far as comedy happened. And so then the Wonder Sisters, though, ended up being my brother, Steve Miller with a big mustache, and myself. And we had 1940s hair pieces that we wore. And we actually sang Judy Garland songs and Andrew Sisters songs, and called ourselves Wonder Sisters. And it was a crowd pleaser. People loved it, just loved it.
I'll tell you, when I interviewed you for the first time, you sang a little clip. What was that one you used to sing? Let the good times roll. Give us a bar, huh?
Come on, baby, let the good times roll.
That was it. I could just picture it. And Tom, didn't you say you saw this act at one point?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Melissa. And I understand that these memories are very healing, but I also understand, we really don't stop grieving, and what did happen affected all of us deeply. Even some of us didn't know at the time it was going to affect us in the way.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. But yeah, you gave me a good time. I love the Cabaret.
Oh, good.
Because I wanted to be a performer at the time, and I remember Charles Pierce and the Wonders, and of course your brother, and then you could go upstairs and dance your ass off. It was quite a little community there, and unfortunately we don't have that anymore. So thanks for that. And I think what you can take from that is, as you're having a good time, as you're feeling fulfilled, this sense of community, this strength in numbers. You also know that, when you leave the sanctuary, that you have to always be alert and be very careful. I'm afraid to say this, but it's the truth. The entrapments, the beating ups, even the murders, I think there was almost a feeling of resignation in the gay community. All right, that's how it's going to roll. we'll deal with it in our way. And I think that resulted in some of the inaction that initially happened around this. The community itself really needed to light a fire under a very homophobic and salacious media. And I think we missed that in the beginning,
Yeah, and it was interesting that led to the Butterfly Brigade with the whistles.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of you were describing that.
Whistles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Tell me. No, go ahead, Tom.
Well, the scene on Castro would be at 2 a.m. The bars would empty out, and it was a sidewalk culture. So all the queens would be there. Some of them snuck drinks out, cruising, dancing, talking. And then up the block, there was a car that pulled up. A bunch of straight punks pulled out and started to wail on this guy. And because of the whistle program, we went around, gave whistles to everyone, the late Hank Wilson. People started to blow their whistles and then head towards that incident was happening. Now, that scared the fag bashers away, and someone did call the cops, and the cops came, and then they hassled the guy that was being beat up. And this is a very familiar thing. I think a lot of minorities know maybe whatever you do, don't call the cops. Well, that was the situation there because they were very homophobic. The guy who got beat up deserved it. What did you do? All that. And later on, Milk was active and the Jewish Calvary, I'd call it. He'd come out and work his way through the crowd and he'd take on the cops. Because I was scared shitless. And we needed someone to take on the cops. And that he was the first one that I saw actually make it public. He had a lot of odds against him, particularly in this dynamic of what happened with the Doodler, the neglect and the nonchalance, etc. But he did make people aware that cops were not necessarily the Vatican.
It's interesting because that oppressiveness, you're right. And one thing that got mentioned quite a bit was a so-called Irish and Italian old boys club at the time that was ignoring these crimes. Dan Cunningham, the cold case cop who took this case on 3 years ago and is really trying to close it out. He's Irish. His dad came from Ireland to be a gravedigger in Colma, and he told me he remembered watching the Butterflies do their thing once in the Castro, and it made a real impression on him. He thought, the gay bashing was messed up. It was before he was a cop, and then later on, now all these years later, he's doing what he's doing. And the two cops who took this case on back then and took it as far as it could go at the time. Were two black cops, Rhea Guilford and Earl Sanders, who another oppressed minority. I mean, they were suing the police department as they were pursuing the Doodler case. And so my impression was, Anne, do you remember Earl and Rhea at all?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I didn't know Earl that well, but Rhea I knew quite well. And both of them were formidable and very well respected and known within the police department and within San Francisco for being able to solve very difficult cases. So I think that, your description of them and the fact that they were obviously a minority themselves and fighting within the police department made them even bigger advocates for trying to get to the bottom of the cases that they got. I mean, they weren't successful in the Doodler, but I do think that they really made an attempt.
Yeah, it was. There were no LGBTQ cops of any kind.
Not
in
yet.
The police department. Not out. Yeah, not out at least.
Not out.
Yeah, and Melissa, how did your brother ever talk to you about being frightened on the street?
I don't know. I don't think he really did. I mean. And if he was frightened, I was oblivious to it. I was oblivious to the fact that the gay community was in danger. I mean, we lived in a little bubble, just having a great time being in our show, and looking forward to the future. And so when all of this happened, it just blew my life apart. And there was so much anger because really to our family, it seemed like there was nothing being done, nothing at all. And it was like, oh, okay, it's just another gay guy, and that was very painful. It still is, but at least this is helping.
Decades went by with you hearing no word about anything.
Nothing.
Just something to put aside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt like that. It felt like, it's just pushed,
Did you know that there were 4 other known victims of the same killer that took your brother's life?
No. Not until you told me.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And each one of those families was terribly traumatized. Some of the families that we talked to, they don't really want to get into it. I mean, some of the fear and the even some shame from the time locked away in 1974 is still there.
Right.
It's very hard to be in. Talk to me a little bit about that period. Was the birth of the gay rights movement in the blossoming of it, as well as the oppressive era. Talk to me a little bit about what the deaths of so many gay people, gays and lesbians, at the time, because it wasn't just the Doodler. There were other people being killed and beaten up. How did that inspire Ann and Tom? How did that inspire you guys to push the way you did? Because you two are pioneers for how we got to where we are today. Ann, tell me a little bit about what that is.
So I was just going to say, when you were talking, Melissa, and you were saying you were in a bubble, I think that some of the way that we survived was to live in bubbles, at least for a period of time. So you go to the places you think are safe, you go to the gay bars, you hang out with, other people that you already know. There was a fun, Tom will back me up on this, a fun gay scene. I mean,
absolutely.
Oh my God, the 1970s for me I don't remember all of them because it was so much fun.
Yeah.
But, to be able to survive, you almost needed to be that bubble. And I think the thing about the Doodler, that one of the things that hit me is, he was meeting young, beautiful men in the bars that were supposed to be the safe places.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you kind of, if you were aware of it and the whole Whistle Brigade and that, made you more aware of it. But if you were aware of it, you weren't thinking it was going to happen among your own in a gay bar. You were thinking it was going to be something that happened, as Tom said, gay bashers coming from someplace else, coming into the neighborhood and getting you. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it got pushed down and not acknowledged as much, because it was just all too scary.
Right.
Yeah. And then, where did you go with it?
Right. What did you do? Did you just stay in the closet? Did you never go out?
Family, that affinity, that extended family, that's what we all wanted, and we felt secure. I guess I'm getting older and watching a lot of nature shows. And the one good thing about the watering hole is it gives you water and all the animals come. The bad thing is the predators are waiting. Yeah. And so, not to get too Darwinian, but yeah, your radar dropped. And it took some sophistication to know if someone was going to come in and rob you and all. And there was a grapevine. We knew that happened, but not to this extent. And the guy was very clever. And obviously, I think crippled by, and this is no excuse, crippled by self-hate. His own orientation. In the Castro at that time, speaking of the police and then the Irish, was Holy Redeemer Church. And it was a lot of the congregation were police and firemen, and also, very heavily Catholic. And they were not, and it's different today, they were not down with the program of having the gay corridors so close. And they actually, this is the lengths they went to, they actually got the Board of Soups or whomever to ban dancing on the Castro.
Oh,
on the street.
I don't know if this is going to be censored, but there's an old saying, why are Mormons against fucking? Because it might lead to dancing, So, and of course it didn't work, but it gave the cops another tool in harassing, because nobody was going to stop dancing. So we're going to bust you for doing the limbo. But there, as I say, with the good times, with the support group, with the safety in numbers, there was fear and there was shame. Liberation came along at the right time, I think, here in San Francisco. But you not only had to fight the outsiders and the murderers and the fag bashers, but you had your own internal politics too. We're very fractured, the gay community, and different races, different gender, and we reflect some of the bad things in general society too. So you're working all that out too. Again, a lot of leadership came from, in those days, I think Harvey, and then the people who supported him. And I just feel so terrible that, Melissa, you didn't even know that there were 4 other people.
No.
I mean, no, that's the crime as well, because they knew, they kept, because they didn't want the trouble, or they I better shut up on mansplaining. But entrapment was another big thing, so the bathroom at Golden Gate Park was a melting pot for lawyers, because the cops would entrap the gay men there, pretend that they were gay, come onto them, and then bust them.
Wow.
I understand some of the gay lawyers actually had a blueprint of the bathroom to prove in court that whatever transpired couldn't have transpired by. I mean, I'm just telling you how granular it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you talked to some of I talked to a lesbian commander at the police department today, Commander Ewens, who's really, she's an evolution of how things have changed, and she still fights some of the suspicion in the community, thinking, cops coming up. She's going to be doing the right thing, but this resonates 45, 50 years later. And did you think things would how fast did you think things would change back when you were all, fighting the fight in the mid-70s?
Not as fast as they did, that's for sure. I think that Harvey's assassination did a lot for us. It was horrible, but in some ways I felt like it ended the progress forward. And in another way, what ended up really happening is it opened the doors for so many more people to spread Harvey's message, to come out. People like Tom, who was very active before that, but, to become politically involved as well. So that, going from one Harvey Milk on the Board of Supervisors, we suddenly had dozens of people speaking for the community, which was very, very powerful. And I think helped speed the evolution of where we are today, if you will.
And you had Tom Ammiano in the state assembly. I mean, things did change.
Tom almost became...
Yeah, but let me just say, one of the most frustrating battles was the cops and their union, and a lot of county organizations who had influence would have on their boards of directors all retired police. Yep. So we were undermined a lot. And one of the biggest, I got to be quiet, but one of the biggest things that happened right before I got there, and, Mark Leno, God love him, fought it as best he could, was the reversal of, Copley. So cops said, well, we need protection.
Explain Copley for those who wouldn't be familiar with it. Explain Copley, Tom.
It was great because it identified bad behavior with cops, and made their records available when there was cases of brutality, etc. And they got that reversed. So I just wanted to weigh in that it's still happening. Black Lives Matter knows, and to me it shows if we're not unified around this, there ain't going to be any changes. We love the gay parade. We love Juneteenth, but there's still George Floyd. There's still Melissa's brother.
I totally agree with you, Tom. And I think that the incremental changes we've seen, like having lesbian and gay men in the police department, have really helped. I was on the orals board for the very first hiring of lesbians and gay men for the police department. I sat on the orals board. So there was an awareness, especially after Harvey was assassinated, that we needed to do things in a different way and change things. That being said, police department, every other, major agency is a bureaucracy, and things don't change overnight. You see that with the fire department. You saw that with the police department as you're bringing, African Americans into the police department. And then you talk about, Earl, and you talk about, it's like that wasn't easy for them, to be the first women. You're right, Tom. So things, you look at it now, and people who might view the police department now are like, oh, it's much better. But in fact, things just happen very slowly when you're talking about bureaucracy.
They really do. And it did take in Harvey's assassination in 1978, it stopped some of the reconciliation that was happening, but it also propelled things forward.
Yeah.
And by the early 1980s, you started seeing the killers of gay men being convicted and going to prison. It changed. Now, Melissa, did you pay attention to any of that evolution as it went along? It seems like that the murder of your brother got locked like amber in history for you.
Right. Well, it does feel like that. And as far as like being aware of the evolution as it was going on, probably not. I was kind of knocked for a loop when all of this happened, and withdrew and didn't really pay attention anymore. I lost contact with all my gay friends. I just withdrew because it's painful, just too painful.
One thing that struck me about you, though, is that you processed this trauma and this pain, so that all these years later, when I first met you, you weren't just a fainting flower. You were.
Oh, I don't think so. Yeah.
No. How did you heal yourself? How did you do the healing that you did so that you can actually talk about this stuff and not collapse into tears? It was a very traumatic thing.
A huge ingredient here is time. Time has really helped, subdue that really horrible feeling that we all had in my family when Joe was killed. And then too, you realize, because I've had other things in my life happen, and you realize that yes, all of these things happen, but if you're going to continue, you need to find a path that's going to make you a better person, fulfill your wants, fulfill your desires, and grow and be positive. And I've really embraced that. And
I found it interesting. Yes, I found it interesting that you, who had some bad things happen, you became a nurse. You were nurturing other people.
You are.
That's true. And a lot of us are like that. Now, granted, I'm a retired nurse. Just so you know, I did not go through the pandemic in a hospital. So, which on one hand, I'm very thankful for. And on the other hand, I really should have been there. You know what I mean? But anyhow, I became a nurse, though, only because I thought I wanted to be a certified nurse midwife. And that kind of went by the wayside when I found out that I'm actually a pretty good adrenaline junkie. And I really liked the emergency room and trauma and the good that you can do in a situation like that. So that was my high for a long, long time. So.
Did you try to carry on in the entertainment business with the
no
afterwards?
No.
Do you still sing and dance?
I dance.
I'm glad to hear it.
Singing makes I choke up, like just bursting out that little thing that I did a few minutes ago. It was like, oh, you're going to start crying. So, so I don't sing anymore.
Why do you think that is? Is it from that what happened all so long ago, or something else?
No, I think it's because all of my singing was with my brother, and just reopens that pain, and I just haven't gotten over that hurdle at all. So, and that's okay. I don't have to sing, and people probably don't want me to sing anymore.
I doubt that very much.
You can certainly sing whatever you want in your own living room. I'll tell you that.
Right.
Oh gosh, yeah. But even alone, I don't sing. So yeah, and that's kind of too bad, but it's how it is.
What did you think of the other men who were killed by the Doodler when you read about them?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think that I feel for their families. I feel for what they had to go through, and I think that the thing that sticks in my mind was the horrible way that they were murdered and how brutal it was. And to think of my brother, especially because I knew him, going through that with the last few breaths of your life, that's still very hard for me to handle. And, I think about their families, and I'm sure that there's probably a string through all of them that connects them that the Doodler probably saw, or if they were all as attractive as my brother was. I just don't know. I don't know about that part, but yeah, I think about their families because it was devastating for our family, very devastating.
I was going to say about your brother. I did talk to folks who had seen the show, and one in particular, I was telling Tom and Ann as well earlier. I say, well, what did you think of Jay's show? And he said, oh, he's just the most beautiful person I ever saw. And then I said, well, how about the singing? Oh, just the most beautiful person I ever saw. It really stood out. But the other thing that stood out about him, he knew karate, right? He was
well, it was actually
kind of
judo.
Judo. Well, he knew how to be a bit of a tough guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so Tom and Ann, talk to me a little bit about what the Doodler effect was on people at the time, because there was about 18 months there, and then afterwards as well. The effect, how much fear did that put into the community, and how did you overcome it? Because people didn't just go away; they still did what they did.
Yeah. I think, of course, it was low on the radar, and then there's also the tendency to not want to think about it too much. Mm-hmm. And there was also the, I wouldn't call it cynicism, but the resignation that what are you going to do with the cops? We really didn't have anybody elected then. We didn't have anybody, certain elected officials, Dan knows about this, finally saw some gay muscle. Some gay people might vote, if they don't wear tight jeans and all that, and they'll give money. So we had a lot of lip service starting to happen, but we were also attached to what was happening in San Francisco otherwise, which was the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the LGBT movement. So San Francisco had that activist layer in it, mostly Eastern San Francisco, not too much in the West at that time. And then, if I always made a joke, a lot of the men, and especially those days and in the Castro, were white. I said, if I meet one more guy from Indiana, and even though they were oppressed on the sexual orientation, they did have privilege. They had white skin privilege. They had some access to stuff. Dianne Feinstein had a little coterie of gay men around her, and for better or for worse, doors were starting to be open. But I don't know who's going to agree with me, but I felt it was a little too comfortable, and we needed to rock the boat more. So taking on the cops was a very good issue for us, and it also led to a meeting with the Black community at Clyde Memorial, where leaders of both got together about this common problem that people had with the police. And there was a bar called the Bojangles in the Tenderloin.
Where Klaus Chrisman was last seen.
Yes.
One of the Doodler victims.
Right. And it catered to black gay men. And so gay and black, are you kidding? Double whammy, right? And the cops would harass and wait till people came out and then, pat them down and, you're going to have something wrong, a joint or whatever. And then they would be outed. And being outed to a family, and this is, thinking of Melissa, Jay was there, right? A lot of these men weren't even out to their families. So when that wasn't recognized by the cops, and when that wasn't punished, and then when people were outed, then that led to this reluctance to step forth. So,
and that's what eventually capped the Doodler investigation. There were 3 surviving victims who were attacked by the Doodler. There was a diplomat, another man on the floor who was probably attacked when the guy came back to finish the diplomat off, and then there was an actor. And there were a lot of theories about who the actor was, but he left town. They didn't want to be outed. Their careers and their lives the idea was that they would be ruined if this came out.
I think that's what you have to understand the most about that period of time. Tom, you said a lot of the men weren't out to their families. I mean, my memory is most people weren't out to their families, and you weren't out at work. I mean, that's why Harvey, the very first thing he did when he got on the Board of Supervisors was to pass a gay rights ordinance so that you couldn't be fired on the basis of your sexual orientation. So I think it's very hard for people nowadays to think back that it could have been like that in the 1970s, but it very much was. And it was, I think that Harvey wanted to stir stuff up, and the gays, if you will, who were comfortable being in the closet and going to dinner at Dianne Feinstein's or doing whatever they were doing. So they felt like they had this access to power because there were powerful people in place who were going to speak out for them, but it wasn't lesbian and gay people themselves. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that it was a different time and place. Things were changing at that time.
Melissa, that's why your brother was so important. I mean, because they're obviously, he recognized as a performer himself a need, a mutual, the community wanted entertainment. They wanted to laugh. They wanted to see themselves. And, there was an out gay person on stage having a really good time, wearing drag or not wearing drag. I mean, that was very affirming, to men and women, I think, and maybe that made him even more dangerous, to the twisted mind.
Yeah.
It was interesting because the Doodler killed Fred Kaplan, who was a war hero. I mean, this guy rescued 4 Marines under fire in Vietnam. Not an easy guy to kill, to subdue. Kavanaugh was an older guy, but a guy who definitely had some muscle. Chrisman was a very handsome dude, came over from Germany. He picked a spread of people. Joe, your brother, was more out than any of them.
Yeah,
apparently. And didn't you say he wanted to cross over into kind of mainstream entertainment as well eventually? Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. He was a fantastic comedian, and just his timing was just superb. So, but talking about coming out to the family and coming out in general. My family, my father, who is, bless his heart, was a devout Texan, and a bigot and all of this, and just, the stereotypical businessman from Texas, and found out that my brother was gay. He probably knew it all along. I mean, he'd been forever, but when he was declined from the draft, they wouldn't take him to the draft. And my father was livid and kicked Joe out of the house.
Wow.
That's how he began his career, right?
And he went to San Francisco, and he started doing what he loved to do, which was dress up like a woman, which he'd always done his entire life, and perform. And my father, in the meanwhile, now this was in like 1966 or so, and in the meanwhile, Jay kept getting more and more acknowledgement for his talents as a drag queen, his talents as a comedian and actor and singer and dancer, and ended up in the early 70s, before, of course, he was murdered, but receiving a very just a really highly accommodated award called the Golden Awards. And he went to the Golden Awards in drag, and left. He was living with my parents at the time, so he was in drag when he left the house.
Wow.
But before he left the house, my father bought him a corsage and pinned it on him.
Oh,
I love that there was some reconciliation there, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I can only imagine how good that step felt to my father, especially after my brother's death. Yeah.
It's each one of these victims of the Doodler had an inner strength that made them be who they were at the time. How did your brother have the balls to be who he was at the time when it was so oppressive, and you get beat up, you get thrown out of your house? How did he have the strength to do that?
He was doing what he loved.
Yeah.
He was doing what he loved. He loved performing. He loved being a woman. You've seen photos. I mean, he's gorgeous. And I mean, he was a gorgeous man too. And, but I mean, from early on, and we've talked about this, Kevin, he would come down when I was about 3 or 4 years old. He'd come down and we'd play for hours, and he'd called himself Carolyn. And it was perfectly normal to me, just so normal. And pardon the pun, but when he came back as Joe, he was a real drag. So
he was lucky to have you as a sister.
Well, yes.
We had, all of us. I mean, we all, because there's 4 more of us. So, yeah. Anyhow, yeah.
Well, Tom, how did you have the gumption to be an out teacher of all things in the early 70s?
Right.
When there was so much crap aligned against you. What gave you that strength?
Well, I think, my, again, connected to the activist part of the LGBT community. I had no interest in people who were in office or running for office. In fact, I think I even told Milk that one time. I said, I don't know how you can do it, Harvey. It's not going to make any difference. And he said, no, I think it can. But, he pointed out that with the activism and being in the halls of, in quotes, power. So I got sustenance from that. I even joined a lefty group called Bay Area Gay Liberation. We called it Bagel. And I learned a lot there. And we started small. We went after some of the gay bar owners who were ripping off people and not allowing women or drag. It was pretty bad. And that, we started to have a cohesiveness then. And then thought maybe we could, stretch these battles that we were having and bring them into our work or bring them into our jobs. And, I was a teacher for about 8 years. And if I learned anything, I learned you can't lie to kids. You're not teaching if you're lying. And a lot of people say, well, you must have heard bad things on the play yard. Well, yes, I did. But guess where I really heard it? In the teacher's room. So if that didn't push me over, I don't know what, And a lot of people, as Ann pointed out, were living a double life. And that can get pretty wearing, gets pretty tiresome. Introducing your roommate for 8 years. Oh, those dresses in the closet? Yeah, my sister visited. I mean, it just got to be dumb. And also anger. I think I brought my own anger to the stage, so to speak. And people connected through the anger. That
reminds me. Yeah, that reminds me of something you told me long ago when you ran for mayor, and I went back to your, got that fun picture of you in drag on a piano in New Jersey. You told me about how when you were a kid in school, the bullies would chase you and hassle you, and that's how I think that's how you learned how to be the comedian that you are, because you're as funny as hell. How has that helped?
I think there's some DNA. My couple of granddaughters are very funny, and of course, my mother was hysterical. Now you have to understand, she didn't think she was funny. She didn't think I was funny, but I think my family had a very strong dealing with things with humor. Some of it was being a working class and Italian American, and some of it was just being who they were. And they did have a sense of irony, which I, for all my pushing the family away and you don't understand me and oh my God, they did give me that, and lucky me,
They gave you a spine too, and you also have a spine. How the hell did you wind up being? How did you have the courage to be who you were at a time when there was disco and it was wonderful? And it reminded me, I heard that your brother had flirted with Sylvester, by the way, in the backstage of Pinocchio's once, Melissa.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. I thought the panelists would appreciate that.
Wow.
A real firecracker of it,
I'll say.
But Anne, how did you, find the strength to be who you needed to be at a time like that?
Kevin, I have no idea. I think that I was very lucky. I was raised in a family that was very loving towards me, which was nice. I was the baby, and so I could kind of do no wrong. And they let me be who I was, even though it was a very conservative Catholic, Irish Catholic family, which certainly I grew up in a suburb out of Seattle that was all white. I mean, there was no diversity at all. But I mean, from the time I was a little girl, anyone who was different from me is somebody I was attracted to. I think I felt different. And I chose to go to college in California, to not stay in Washington. I mean, the first time I came to San Francisco, I was 13 or 14, and I fell in love with San Francisco and said, this is where I want to be. And it was just everything I wanted. And I think when you're young, you don't know to be afraid. And I think that,
it's a lucky thing. Yeah,
it is a lucky thing. And so, here I meet Harvey and I get to work on the campaign and all these great people like Tom. And it was just, you feel invincible. And part of it is, I think that you don't want to acknowledge what the fear factor is out there of things that could happen. Because, again, you're young, you're in your 20s. And I've always believed in, from a really young age, social justice, and I just kind of fell into it. It's not nothing that's so glamorous as what Tom explained. I guess it is my DNA, just the way I was made up.
Well, you guys both went into the system to try to affect change from within eventually.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I learned that from Harvey. I mean, Harvey was like, we can be out here and be activists, which we were, or you can take it inside City Hall and you can make some real change. And so that stuck with me. I mean, I had been involved in the women's movement big time. My first campaign was around Earth Day when I was 15. So it was the environmental movement in my little town in Washington. And so I was always politically actively involved, and it was just kind of a natural progression.
Yeah.
So, but with Harvey saying, we can make a difference. It's like activists are wonderful. You need activists, but from the inside, you can create real change.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you guys proved it. Let me swing back to the series just for a second. It got reprinted
Yeah.
one of the
It's
recent papers.
beautiful.
Thank you. My colleagues at the Chronicle did all that. I just wrote the stuff.
It was great. It was great.
Thanks. What surprised you? For each one of you, tell me what surprised you that in looking at the series and in listening or reading it. Did anything surprise you in it? Anne, what?
Yeah, I think it reignited
Oh,
something that maybe you not accepted, but buried, or you gotta go on. What can I say? That what's happening today, particularly with the police and all that, it seemed even more relevant. And then the high percentage of transgender murders, particularly Black. You go, I recognize that. I know what that's about. But we're still running in place. We got the focus, but as Ann said, and Melissa too, there's a lot more to do. So I found it rewarding in a strange way, because I think, if you're still around and live long enough, you do have a duty to those men and the forces that shaped everything. And if you're a certain age, you were definitely part of that. So this isn't some anonymous human being. And I think, Melissa, the way you humanize your brother, is very, very poignant and very moving, not just a statistic, or, as is often said, just another gay guy like that. Full disclosure, there was a gay cop, openly gay cop, who served in the Castro. He was always pissed off at me.
Oh,
because I was critical. And I said, you're a part of a bigger thing. I understand, but I'm just saying there's another dynamic, when you're trying to move forward. You got to bring people along with you, even those who maybe aren't too happy with you. So,
well, thank God for evolution, huh? Jesus.
Yeah, Darwinian.
I think
So,
the
Ann,
thing that surprised me the most, Kevin, was Melissa, your willingness to share so much about your brother, and your honesty and your bravery.
Boy, thank you.
I think you were incredibly brave, and you put you can talk about a murder in the past tense, but you put a face to it. We all got to know Jay through the Doodler podcast, and I think that was absolutely important. And when you were talking earlier about how this was healing for you and you kind of pushed it back, I have to tell you, I can relate to that so much, because when Harvey was assassinated, I had the exact same reaction. I just wanted to pull back. It was too painful. It was just really difficult. People like Tom, who continued to fight the fight. I mean, there were years in there that I was doing things within city government, but I wasn't out being an activist like Tom, and I
you were really good at what you did.
Well, thank you.
You kicked
Tom.
a lot of ass. That's another show.
I certainly
you can tell,
tried, but I think, for me, the making of the movie Milk really helped me with some closure and so it's very similar to the story you tell, and but thank you, Melissa.
Oh, you're very welcome. And again, it is healing for me. And I think that's probably what has surprised me the most out of the whole thing is that how helpful it's being to me, and how it's making me feel almost whole again. I mean, I don't want to sound like I felt empty or anything like that, but I didn't realize how much this event has shaped my life until going back through it. And also too, Kevin, you're a really good interviewer. You got me to talk about things I'd forgotten about.
I wanted to know. You're a very good interview.
Oh shoot! I think we sat out there for 3 hours.
We did, but you just kept going. I don't ever want to push anyone past where they really, really, really want to go.
No, you kept drawing. You kept drawing things out of me. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
I thought it might help too. That that was a lot of the purpose of the thing. I wanted it to help, and my partner Mike Taylor did, and Dan Cunningham, the cop, who's pushing for this. You want to make things better. You don't want to just be some vulture,
I have a
you.
question. The other family members, did they not want to talk about this, or could you not find them, or?
It was difficult. We had to hire a stringer in Sweden to find Harold Goldberg's familial roots. The family really didn't want to talk. The history was there. It was difficult in Germany. There was still a lot of pain. The family did not want to be named, and it was difficult to find them as well. Because of the pandemic, Mike and I couldn't fly to these locations. Otherwise, we would have. But we hired people who did, and there was a lot of help from the British film company that really kind of kickstarted this podcast, the Ugly Duckling Film Company, with Lena Bowseter and Sophia Gibber, producers. They really put their shoulders into it over there, because it turned out there was a lot of connection over there.
I bet.
Yeah, and we needed it because I didn't want to just leave anyone unfound, and neither did Mike. We went to Canada. We did the same thing. A lot of phone calls. We could do that, but then hiring people to go bang on doors, because there were people who didn't want to come to the phone. We had to actually knock on doors in Canada. For
You're on a mission, and and we're grateful. And I think you're also. This is showing the universality of this issue, because in Australia, I understand there was, back in the day, there was a string of gay men murdered at a certain point. Like a mountain point by the sea, and one guy's brother persisted and persisted and persisted, and finally got some recognition or justification that, it was an accident, because he got pushed off the precipice there. So it's bigger even than here. And
there's something about a murder, a killing that just won't let people go. I've covered other cold cases. One that involved a Hells Angels hit. Took 20 years for the cops to put this one together, but they wouldn't let it go. It doesn't really bring closure to anything, like Melissa we've talked about. Finding if the Doodler gets caught, which he may, it's not gonna bring Joe back, but it could bring some answers. And that reminds me of what you said when we talked. What you would say to this killer if you could actually talk to him. What would each of the three of you say to the Doodler if you could? Tell us, Melissa.
I have no idea, really. I know that when we were interviewing, I said, I'd like to scratch his eyes out. Well, in reality, I wouldn't, but I don't want to.
You're too nice.
But it's like, maybe I would just go, why? Why? It's so senseless. And it created so much pain for so many people. So maybe that's all I could say to him, and then just leave him alone.
I think that a lot of the people, the Doodler case was San Francisco, but this was happening around the country. There was a similar case in New York City. There was, this was not a one-off, and I think that. This goes back to what Harvey used to say, but those people who spoke the loudest against gay rights, those people who acted in a way like the Doodler did, actually killing people, were the ones who needed the help, who were closeted. Harvey always felt that with the Briggs Initiative in his right before he was assassinated in 1978, that Briggs was a gay man, and that he wanted to go after gay teachers and people who affiliated with or who sympathized with gay teachers, because he was so afraid of his own sexuality. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I think that in a theory, somebody who's going to go to the extremes that the Doodler did has to have have something in themselves that they're so afraid of that they're trying to get rid of it. And obviously killing other people is not the way to do that.
And yet there's a great deal of responsibility there, and anger and grief. I mean, what would I say to Dan White?
Yeah.
Imagine.
What would you say to Dan White?
Yeah. Who the hell are you? Who made you God? You got a kid, you got a life partner, you just shit all over him, pal. You're weak. What are you afraid of? What have you been afraid of? I'm not Dr. Phil, you can tell.
No. That sounds like what you would say to the Doodler as well.
I would try to, be bigger in another way and, get at the roots of all that. But, none of us can be accountable for the Doodler or there's no excuse. If there's a mental illness thing here, okay, fine. But you still murdered 7 people.
Yeah.
And that can't go unanswered. And, God, if they do catch him, if it's a him, which I'm assuming, then all of us deserved to go to a bar and have a strong martini, for your brother and all the others. So
I will drink to that, Tom.
I'm still pissed.
I think any one of those 5 men, your brother, the other 4 guys, and Warren Andrews, they could have. Who knows what they could have gone on to do with their lives? And being closeted, and several of them were closeted. I mean, they were trying to live. They were edging. Jay was already out, but they were edging toward an open life. And you think about what could have been, and how many lives were cut short like that. Well, the AIDS epidemic later on took so many people away.
Part of the closet thing and why it really is devastating is you are then threatened by other people who are out. And I don't, like I say, I'm not Dr. Phil. I don't know what went on in this creep's mind, but so just the fact that you're out, that there's a club, whatever it is, that threatens those who are closeted, and then some of them are a little more psycho than others, and then they commit such a heinous act. So Harvey's trope that we all use is come out, and it's so simple, and yet it's so complicated. But you could come out and still be an asshole. You could come out and still be a murderer, I guess. But
sure,
it's still something that should be a goal for all of us.
Yeah. Well, how important is it 45 years later, 46, 47, actually, if you really do all the math, how important is it to solve this thing all these years later?
And
I would love to see this solved. I hope it is solved, Kevin. I think that you've done a great justice in putting it out there, and maybe we will get some kind of extra closure on it.
Yeah. And I think we could learn from it too. Is this going to be repeated? Is it being repeated now?
It is being repeated.
So, sometimes we fool ourselves and we think we've gotten this far. So everything is cool. Oh, we can get married. We can do this and that. There's so much more. So much more.
Do you think the younger generation, I mean, all of you date from back in those days, do you think the younger generation actually understands the meaning and the history of these events from back then, how they pertain to today?
We say mezza mezz in Italian, half and half. Yeah. But it's very promising. Very promising. The awareness, the vocabulary, how deep it goes, I don't know. Will it sustain? And will they connect the dots to other struggles? So it's not just rainbows and this and that, and it is. I hate that I'm saying this, but it's true. It is all about love, self-love, love of others, and I ain't hokey, but self-respect, all that goes into it, and a lot of young people, have that. This is, for some of them, it's behind them. but the growth is still necessary, and don't throw the old folks away. I think there's a dialogue that can happen there.
Yeah, one theory we had was that there's a psychiatrist who took what amounted to a confession from the leading suspect back in the day, and we thought he may have been a gay conversion therapist. They still wind up being. I doubt it now.
Wait for the movie.
In terms of researching this, we found there still is gay conversion therapy going on in this country, and especially in our bubble here in the Bay Area, we don't think it, because it's not allowed here in California. But
in Sacramento, there was a controversy about that. We got a bill that did away with it, and I stood up and I said to the Republicans, I said, think about me, Tom Ammiano, heterosexual. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Oh, geez. That's yeah, but let's see. We have a question. Were you able to ask the person of interest who the Highland Hospital doctor was? No, we were not.
Priest.
One of the. Yep. Tom?
Yeah, Priest.
Yes, Priest.
Yeah.
What we did was we found one of the aspects of this was that some of the note taking back then, it's so long ago. Some notes may have been misplaced. Some notes were taken, maybe left a little indistinct to protect the guy. There's a theory that perhaps the shrink didn't want to be identified. But there's some hope that we're going to be able to get a hold of some of the papers that point toward some clues in that. But you want to, as a reporter, you want to report as much as you can. You also don't want to mess up the case. Go bang on the door of whoever the person of interest might be, and pull everything out of him, publish it in a story, and then that makes it unusable in a trial. The guy's not even a suspect yet. So it's a funny fine line you're trying to do, because as a reporter, you're doing a public service as well as reporting journalism. You're trying to make things. You try to make life better. That's one of the reasons you get into journalism. And you don't want to be a tool of the police or just some attack dog. It's a funny thing. Any more questions out there in the world? It's funny doing this stuff by Zoom or whatever this program is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to that. And why do you think this thing is still resonates half a century later? Why is it important to solve this?
I think that what Tom has inferenced this a number of times in our little discussion. I think what's happening now in the world, and you see, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and it feels like there is a Black man getting killed every week by the police. I think that there is not equality in our world, that's for sure. And the lesbian and gay movement has moved very far. We have marriage equality now, but you look out at the bigger society, there's a lot of hatred out there. And I think that having closure on something from the 70s would really help us move forward. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, given the context of where we are right now and the horrible place that our former president left the country, it's like it's going to take a lot of healing for us to get back, and there has to be a willingness to do it. And I think each small step, and I'm not saying finding the Doodler is small, that would be huge, but I think that plays into the bigger picture of what we as a society are experiencing right now.
It's interesting, with all the controversy about police departments all over the country, one thing I did take a little hard in was the emphasis and the passion that the cops are on this Doodler case, and their commanders, and the LGBTQ cops on the force became pretty invested in trying to close this thing out. Boy, I couldn't have seen that 30 years ago. No. 40 years ago.
It didn't exist.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It gives you some hope. Yeah. Melissa, right. Have you been? What's been your impression of that? To have this thing come back all these years later, with police actually trying to close it out?
Well,
Yeah,
I think it's
go ahead.
amazing that they're doing it. Again, the feeling that my family had when this all happened was just like, it just didn't matter. Just didn't matter. So it's. I think that's a huge step.
Well, not only does Joe matter, but you matter.
That's right. A lot. Yeah. I say stay pissed off.
Mhm.
Otherwise, don't lose that sense of justice, and you can't do it alone. You will burn out. I mean, there's just so much, class issues and race issues. They all impact on this in one way or another. But that's what I mean about unity and connecting the dots. I guess I've said that a lot, but
no, it can't be said enough. It's very important. We have a question here about it says, do you think you'll try to reach out to the European families now that COVID is ending? Will they see the benefits of closure, which it's not exactly closure, but some of the healing that Melissa's experiencing? Yeah, this project is not over. It ran to 8 episodes. We still got 1 or 2 more to go as developments happen. There are possibilities of a movie, a TV, a book. I think that the history of this, placing it into context, is important. And Mike and I are interested. Yeah, we're interested in going to some of the folks up in the Northwest, Fred Kappan's family. They're fascinating people, really nice folks. And in Canada, Sweden, I mean, they were all over the world. Heck, Howard Goldberg wound up in Singapore for a while.
Wow.
I remember him.
Yeah, and he. One interesting thing I don't think we could explore much in the series, but he was the last known victim before Warren Andrews. He spent his life as a merchant marine going around the world, fleeing essentially kind of staying ahead of the Swedish government, who was trying to collect money for taking care of him in Singapore during the World War II. And when he died, he left about the equivalent of $250,000 under his mattress, essentially, in a Tenderloin hotel. Those kind of details, I would like to get more. I would like to get out there more.
Because I think they're emblematic too. The individual story, I think, can also become emblematic of other stories, and that's what we really we want to happen. We want justice done.
Yeah, and I wonder if each one of these men, with the exception of Jay, had been able to be out as much as Jay, what would that have been in their lives? Would they have had to? Would they have been open to someone like the Doodler? Because there is, of course, this theory that's bouncing out there that the Doodler actually met these guys at the hookup spot. I don't think Jay, because that was not as much of a hookup spot as the others, met them at hookup spots, and they were vulnerable.
Then where else could you go? I mean,
that's the thing
that's been going on for years, and the bars became only one vehicle, by the way, because there's always drinking there, and there was so if you wanted more than the bar, and if you really wanted to get intimate with someone, you couldn't bring them home.
Go to the baths.
Yeah, and there was a certain intrigue, and well, it is what happened. And again, I am very grateful that you've done this. It's use the word reignited, huh? Some of the passion that we all feel, and I don't know what's going to happen with this, but I would like to see the scales adjust, and that we learn from it. No repeats. No repeats.
Yeah. Now, Lee from the GLBT History Society, are you still on this link here?
I am. Yes. Hello.
There you are. Well, you are with the Historical Society. How does the Doodler fit into your museum? Because you guys are vast and deep on gay history, LGBTQ history through the years. How does this thing fit into your timeline?
Well, I mean, I think you can probably, speak to that pretty well. I know that, Kevin, you've reached out to us before, and you've spoken to Isaac Fellman, our reference archivist, and they're really just there isn't a lot that we could find. There's, not a huge amount that we were able to dig up, and like everyone on this panel has been saying, it was just kind of, pushed under the rug. So I'm really thrilled that, everyone that you were able to talk to and everything that you were able to dig up in the course of this series is, hopefully going to allow more to be written down and preserved about this.
One thing I found when I was researching this, there were a lot of gay murders in the 70s. How Tom and do you think? Yeah. Do you think they were overlooked? Right, and they didn't have a catchy little thing like the Doodler with his sketchbook. They were just bad guys beating the hell out of people or shooting them or stabbing them.
Yeah, or sometimes they say they were suicided, or I think the feeling was it was deserved, so they got what they deserved, and that came out during the AIDS crisis too. I mean, that stuff's going to be around, for a while. The best thing, Lee made me think. You see, we're critical of the media. I remember the story you told me, Kevin. Of they actually mentioned a murder in the Chron or the Exam, and then right next to it was a story about a big S&M club. Yes. I mean, that was
like Tee-hee.
Like Tee-hee. And see how it is. But you are on the inside. You are a journalist and a reporter, and you're a valuable person because you're not that part of it. You're not that slice of it, which I know when it comes to making a livelihood and all that, there's probably been some big challenges. But I did want to acknowledge that.
I'll tell you that. Thank you very much. But I'll tell you that the team at the Chronicle, they were all in. And
great.
Heck, the film company out of Britain, of all places, was all in on this. It was very encouraging to me to see that people felt invested in telling this in a way that we could not have told it 45 years ago.
Well, your intuition. It was your intuition, and it's born fruit. No pun intended. I'm getting tired. You can tell. Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Well,
actually, I'd love to hear more of your routine. I've seen you on stage. You crack me up every time.
Well, it unfortunately is coming very close to our time, to the end of our time here this evening. I really want to thank all of you for sharing your stories and your experiences. And Melissa, I hope that you in seeing everyone's messages and speaking with everyone tonight, has contributed a little bit to some of the healing. And I wanted to just kind of, before closing out tonight and letting folks know where they can see more of our programs and things like that, I wanted to, Kevin, could you let folks know where they can, if they haven't already listened to the podcast series and read the story?
Absolutely.
And also a couple of tip lines open.
Yeah, you can find this on sfchronicle.com, which is where you get the podcast series of 8 podcasts. And there are 7 stories that go with it, because one story goes with the first 2 podcasts. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just punch in The Doodler; it'll pop right up. It did pretty well in the rankings, so it stays pretty available. And it's free on the podcast platform, and very cheap if you subscribe to the Chronicle, which would be glad for me to mention.
Nice little plug.
Yeah, and this case has been reopened, and so there are a couple of tip lines we'll put up here. So if you are watching this and you have any memories, if you have any information that you might want to share for this investigation, we have 2 numbers on here. We have the lead detective on the case, Dan Cunningham, and there's also the anonymous SFPD tip line. So we'll just have this up here through the end. And I really thank all of you for joining us tonight, those of you who have been speaking and those of you who have been watching.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you,
Lee.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Society.
Yeah, thank you so much, all of you.
Thank
Hello
you.
and good night, Anne.
Good
Yeah.
night, Tom.
Yes.
Good night, everyone. Have
Good
a
night.
wonderful and safe weekend.
Yes, it's Pride.
You and
Thank you.
happy Pride.
That's
All
right.
right. Have
Bye,
a good
guys.
evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.